June 9, 1945. Northern Germany lay in ruins. The thunder of war had faded, leaving behind silence and disbelief. The crossfields, once scorched by tanks and shellfire, the remnants of the German military, now walked in surrender. Among them were not only soldiers, but hundreds of women, nurses, clerks, radio operators, and auxiliaries of the defeated Reich. Many of these women had been indoctrinated since youth to believe that capture by the British meant humiliation or worse. Nazi propaganda painted the British as vengeful imperialists who would show no mercy. So when the moment of surrender came, fear gripped every heart. In a makeshift field near Lübeck, a long column of prisoners waited for transport. American trucks rolled past, but the women were told they would be handed to the British authorities. For many, that news brought even greater dread. Rumors had spread. The British were strict, cold, unforgiving. Some whispered that the women would be sent to hard labor, shackled like criminals. Among the group was a young Red Cross nurse named Greta. She had tended to wounded soldiers until the very last day of the war. When she saw the British trucks approaching, she whispered to her friend Hild, "If they chain us, I won't resist. I just want it to be over." But what happened next would defy every expectation. The British soldiers who arrived were calm, organized, and polite. They spoke little, giving clear orders through interpreters. The women were searched respectfully. No shouting, no roughness, no humiliation. Then they were guided toward the trucks. None of them were chained. None. Greta looked down at her wrists, still free, and could hardly believe it. She asked the guard beside her, "No chains?" The British sergeant simply replied, "You're prisoners, not criminals." Those words spread like wildfire among the group. Some women wept quietly, unable to process the difference between what they had been told and what they were living. The convoy drove toward a British-administered POW camp near Hamburg. The roads were lined with wreckage and homeless refugees. British soldiers occasionally waved to locals, sharing cigarettes or small food rations. To the women in the trucks, it felt surreal. These men, their enemies for 6 years, showed not hatred, but composure. When they arrived, the camp looked nothing like the grim prisons they had imagined. Barbed wire surrounded the perimeter, yes, but inside were rows of wooden barracks, clean pathways, and gardens, already being tended by other prisoners. At the gate, a large sign read simply, "British Army POW Compound 22. Inside, the women were processed with precision, their names recorded, medical checks performed, and belongings listed. The British medics treated cuts and malnutrition without hesitation. One nurse was given aspirin and clean bandages by a British doctor. She later wrote in her journal, "I had treated their wounded, and now they were treating me." First meal shocked everyone. Warm porridge, bread, and tea. It wasn't luxurious, but it was food. Real food. After months of famine and bombing, that alone felt like salvation. The women ate in silence, some with tears running down their cheeks. That night, as they settled into bunks inside the barracks, a British officer walked through the camp. He nodded politely, ensuring all was in order. His quiet professionalism was something few of them had ever seen from any authority. For the first time, they slept without fear of bombs, soldiers, or chaos. Days passed, and routines began. Roll call, cleaning duty, laundry, and short walks around the camp. What stunned the women most was the freedom they were given. They were allowed to walk around the grounds unguarded. Some helped in the kitchens. Others tended to the camp garden. They weren't chained. They weren't even shouted at. In one recorded diary entry, a German POW wrote, "The British treated us with dignity. We expected to be slaves, but instead they said, 'You are soldiers who lost a war.' That was all." Soon, the women began interacting more freely with the guards. They exchanged polite greetings, learned English phrases like "good morning" and "thank you," and sometimes shared laughter over simple things. A mispronounced word, a dropped tray, or a curious question about British life. The British soldiers, many of them young and weary from years of combat, treated the women with cautious respect. Discipline was absolute. Any misconduct by a guard was punished immediately. The British believed deeply in the Geneva Convention, and their sense of duty meant that every prisoner, regardless of gender, was to be treated humanely. Outside the camp, however, Germany was still starving. Cities like Hamburg and Berlin were piles of rubble. Food was scarce, and disease was spreading. The women in the camp, realizing how fortunate they were, began to assist the British in relief work. Some volunteered to translate for local civilians. Others helped sort supplies for displaced persons. The British commanders, impressed by their cooperation, gave them small privileges: letters home, better rations, even walks outside the fence. One Sunday, Greta and several other women were taken to a nearby field hospital to assist. British nurses, for the first time, they saw Allied and German wounded being treated side by side. It was an image they never forgot. The same British medics who had once fought their army, now carefully tending to German soldiers. The kindness didn't erase guilt or loss, but it did plant something new: respect. The women began to see the British not as enemies, but as men of honor. One wrote in a letter, "They conquered us without hatred. That is true victory." Over time, some of the British officers shared quiet conversations with the prisoners. They spoke about families, home, and what peace might look like. One officer told Greta that he had lost his brother in North Africa, looked at him, unsure how to respond, and whispered, "I'm sorry." It was the first time she had ever apologized to an enemy. He nodded, eyes distant, and said, "The war's done. We just carry on." By autumn, the camp had become something remarkable, a place of learning and reflection. The British provided books, even small chalk, encouraging education and discipline. A few women began teaching English to each other, using scraps of paper and bits of charcoal. Others painted or sewed, trying to reclaim fragments of normal life. Outside observers from the Red Cross visited frequently and praised the British command for maintaining humane conditions. Reports described the female German prisoners as healthy, cooperative, and surprisingly optimistic. But it wasn't just the food or safety that felt miraculous. It was the dignity. None of them had been paraded in chains, none publicly humiliated. The British simply refused to do so. Their sense of justice didn't allow degradation. Even when the women worked in nearby farms or warehouses under guard, they walked freely, unshackled. Villagers who saw them were stunned. A few British civilians, still mourning loved ones lost to German bombings, watched the women pass and expected bitterness. But when they saw that these prisoners behaved respectfully, bowing their heads, offering quiet thank yous, anger began to fade. Some local British women even brought spare clothes or bread to the POWs. "They are human, after all," one said in a local paper, "and the war has punished them enough." Months later, when repatriation began, many of the German women wept as they left the camp. They had arrived broken, afraid, and expecting cruelty, but were leaving with a sense of hope they hadn't felt in years. One wrote in her farewell letter, "We entered this camp as enemies and leave it as human beings again." Back in Germany, these women carried their stories home. They spoke of fairness, respect, and unexpected kindness. Their testimonies would later play a quiet but vital role in reshaping how Germans saw their former enemies, not as monsters, but as men who upheld honor in victory. Years later, historians studying British POW policy found consistent evidence of humane treatment. While shortages and hardships existed, the moral discipline of the British Army remained intact. Female prisoners, in particular, were shielded from abuse and treated according to strict military codes. Many of those women never forgot it. One such letter, written decades later, read, "When we were captured, I thought it was the end, but the British showed us something stronger than power decency. You gave us back our faith in humanity." And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, not won by guns or tanks, but by restraint, compassion, and discipline. To this day, the phrase, "without chains," holds deep meaning among the surviving German women who lived through those camps. It was proof that in the ruins of war, decency still existed.